This brings me to the topic of the lecture. So today I will be presenting a topic on microbiome, a vital resource for changing climate and food security. Before going into the topic of the presentation, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Abdul Latif Khan. I'm an assistant professor at Department of Engineering Technology, Cullen College of Engineering, University of Houston. My lab is located in University of Houston Sugarland campus, and there are some details on the lab social media platform. So if somebody wants to go into several activities and want to visit and see, they can always tune to some of the news and events coming up from our lab through social media. So professor at Department of Engineering Technology, Cullen College of Engineering, University of Houston. My lab is located in University of Houston Sugarland campus, and there are some details on the lab social media platform. So if somebody wants to go into several activities and want to visit and see, they can always tune to some of the news and events coming up from our lab through social media. So um, of course, I mean, like my lab is specialized in plant microbiome, plant soil microbiome. We do a lot of studies, and there are several different projects running on understanding how microorganisms or combination of microorganisms or their consortiums play a crucial role in combating climatic changes. We always try to understand what is the what kind of microorganisms are there living in a particular system, but at the same time we always are interested to understand the function of these microorganisms with specifically with plants and specifically with crops, since crops are really important for our food security. So that's why our my lab focus is mainly on understanding crop performance during climatic stress, as well as the microbiome function. But in addition to microbiome studies, we also do several other projects basically on plant molecular physiology, where we try to understand what kind of genes are responsible for specific trait and function during climatic stresses to economically important crops. But at the same time we also try to understand what kind of metabolites these plants or their associated microorganisms are producing. So let's go into the today's project, today's topic. So as we all know, plants are sessile. They cannot run away from any kind of stress situations. They have to always cope with whatever they are faced with. In normal, optimum conditions, they always are dependent on a feasible amount of temperature, sunlight, and a specific amount of water availability in soil system. And based on these three ingredients, um, the plants always develop its own system where it performs photosynthesis, it reproduces itself, it uptake nutrient from soil, and it at the same time perform essential metabolic functions that can be really important for plant growth and development. And obviously, if the whole functioning is going well, the yield is always one of the key parameter that we have to always rely on the plants. So the yield is always better during optimal required conditions. So in overall sum, four major ingredient: water, pH, soil type, and the existing microbial diversity are basically key to plant growth and development. And indeed, whenever plants are growing, they would produce some sugars, some root exudates that would include some essential metabolites that could be important for microorganisms as well as for nutrient acquisitions. And in return, some of the microorganisms would be producing also enzymes that could facilitate the nutrient mobilization and all those different processes. In reality, if the plants are exposed to optimal growth conditions, it means there will be a good growth system and sustainable productivity of of the crop will be always there. And if there is a sustainable productivity, it means the farmers are happy. We have enough food. We don't have to worry on that. However, the situation is changing, and it's changing because of the recent climatic change scenarios, and that is happening throughout our world. So there are two major concerns that are happening and that are basically reshaping plant growth and our food and agriculture system. And one is the change in temperature, but at the same time the changes in rainfall pattern. Changes in temperature, for example, if it is too much warm, that is heat stress for plants, the plant survivability is affected. And on the other hand, extreme amount of cold stress periods is another issue that can really impact plant growth and development. And if we talk about rainfall, so too little of rainfall is again a limiting factor for plant growth and development. But at the same time, too much of rainfall in the form of flooding stress is again a limiting factor for plant growth and development. Um, so recently we have been observing and going through all these different data sets on the climatic change scenarios, and there have been recently identified that the temperature is changing to plus 1.44 degrees Celsius. And this is although a negligible amount, if somebody would say, but of course, an episode of plus 1.5 degree centigrade for continuously 2 months could be not an optimal temperature for plant growth and development. And maybe for a small period of time, the plant can cope, but the problem is for longer period of time, these kind of situations are really detrimental to plant growth and development. So thus, there are several threats that are exposed, and these plants are basically crops are basically exposed to those. And if we talk about these different threats, so we have climatic threats, we have anthropogenic threats, we have biotic threats, we have abiotic threats. So I will just give you a brief background of what kind of threats we are expecting. So currently we are expecting that if, for example, any of these two scenarios are changing, and first of all is, let's say if there is a temperature change, and obviously heat and cold are extreme temperature and both can be really detrimental to plant growth and development. And at the same time, if it is flooding stress or drought stress in the form of water availability to plant or its growth can also be detrimental to obtaining the optimal growth and sustainable yield. So, for example, a flooding episode of 3 to 7 days basically compromises the plant growth to up to 20%. This is quite a huge number. And if we see into the market value and the economic impact of this flooding stress, it's around like 50 billion US dollar only in 2022. And if we talk about drought, the soil moisture, if it reduced to almost 5% and it remains for 12 to 18 days, it can reduce plant growth to 28%, which is quite enormous. And as I mentioned, that heat and cold episodes for 18 days can reduce plant growth to 27 degrees and 27 percentage. And if we talk about other threats, the plant are also exposed to several biotic threats. Of course, microorganisms play a crucial role in plant growth and development, but there are several kind of microorganisms that are extremely harmful. For example, there are several pathogenic fungi that can drastically impact plant growth and development. I will just give you an example of cyst, a nematode that usually um, uh, f- causes a lot of problems to root growth and development in soybean. And then there are several other bacteria and viruses. But in addition to those, of course, if you talk about weeds and you talk about insects, and also grazing could be a major biotic threat for plant growth and development. So if we uh, the current estimate shows that the plant diseases basically cost around $120 billion every year to agriculture economy, and farmers almost lose 10 to 23% of their crop because of fungal infection. So, in addition to biotic threat, there are several anthropogenic threats that are also um, exposed to the plants, and these kind of threats could be included, for example, pesticide, herbicide application to plant to achieve sustainable growth, but at the same time, these can be hazardous to our environmental system. Same is the case of accumulation of microplastics and heavy metals, and several organic pollutants that could change the soil chemistry and root growth and development. And thus, the plant cannot cope with those kind of situations. So everything should be in optimal condition, and that's how you can get a sustainable yield and sustainable plant growth development. So um, so if we overall convert all these different practices that is currently based or categorized in anthropogenic activities. So 40% of the earth land has been compromised by human activities, for example, urbanization, deforestation, industrial development, industrialization. You can just name all these different threats. So the last part of plant that are exposed or crop that are exposed to threats are basically um, an imbalance in soil chemistry. For example, if there are too many ions of NaCls, or for example, if the pH of the soil system change, that is also not a good kind of scenario for plant growth and development. Similarly, the soil system that is poor in nutrient could be also one of the leading factor for plant growth and development. And this is also um, an important factor, that if microorganisms are also in lesser abundance in a soil system, so probably that would be also a leading factor for achieving plant growth and development. And if you talk about the soil-based threats in terms of soil salinization, heavy metal addition, pollutants addition, even alkalinity is one of the key problem for gaining sustainable plant growth and yield. So soil salinization has been reported almost like $28 billion economic cost, and currently salt and pH can affect up to around 23% of cultivated lands. And every year we are losing around 1.5 million hectare of farmland because of soil salinization. And one of the most important thing that currently is also happening, and obviously flooding can be one of the reason, but of course the land use practices are also one of the uh, key factor for losing the topsoil, and currently there is an increase of 2.5% in soil erosion globally, so that topsoil is basically lost every year. So now the problem is human population is increasing, if we see the projected population by 2100, we will be expecting around 12 billion people, and we need a sustainable agriculture output. If you see here, the output is quite changing every year. So, for example, in 2019, 2020, we were faced with pandemic, and the agriculture output was exceptionally low in that particular time, although we are still coping up and improving the crop productivity of some of the primary crops, for example, soybean, sorghum, wheat, rice. But at the same time, there is still an unsustainable trend in the overall output of primary crops. And similar perspective has been also associated with agriculture output in terms of market development. Although the market is quite grooming, and it is improving every year onward, and currently agriculture is basically considered as one of the top economically driven industry with a $4 trillion worldwide, or even more than 4 trillion worldwide. However, because of these different environmental factors, um, the economic output is high, but crop productivity is reducing, and that's the reason why we need to come up with sustainably viable solutions, and economically as well as eco-friendly alternatives that could not only maintain a sustainable production but supply a food product, but at the same time maintaining this overall economic output. So if you see the current trends, we can easily see that there is around 33% of agriculture land lost in last 40 years, with US around 1.3 million acre of farmland in 2021. And most of these farmlands are lost because of urbanization, community developments, and also because of several other ways. Either some of the lands became infertile, or maybe the farmer have switched from agriculture profession to other profession, that is causing conversion of this. So one of the most important thing that I really believe on, and that is soil. So since our global system is really important system, and it is a self-driven, sustainable, and a balanced uh, system. So the three important things are really crucial for our human survival: air, water, and our soil system. So if any of these three are impacted, this will ultimately impact our crop production system, and we will not get sustainable yield and development. So just an example of soil, it takes around 500 years to to do the chemical weathering and natural weathering process to come up with a 2.5 centimeter of topsoil. But it takes 10 to 20 years to erode that particular top soil. So this is how the things are really important. And if I give an example of air as in one of the major factors. So, for example, greenhouse gas emissions are the leading causes of global warming, and it is also one of the leading cause of biogeochemical cycling. For example, carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur and phosphorus cycling are really important for plant growth and development. So, the global warming effect is impacting changes in the rainfall patterns, but at the same time also changing the temperature conditions. And these anthropogenic as well as climatic change substantially impact plant growth development and food production. So now the question comes, we should adopt and how we should adopt sustainable and ecologically relevant solutions. And one of the relevant solution could be utilizing microorganisms and microbiome. Engineering microbiome could basically help improve plant growth and development, but at the same time, improve the production, crop production during climatic change scenario. So one of the key questions that my lab usually always ask, does plant microbiome improve crop resilience and food production during climatic change or not? So this is one of the key questions that we always look for. So now what is microbiome? Microbiome is basically a sum of microorganisms. They can be bacteria, fungi, protists, even viruses. There are several microalgae that are always there, and their function and interaction with host and environment. So three things are really important in microbiome is one is, of course, the microorganisms as a community itself. But the second thing is what kind of host is there and what kind of environment is there. So microorganisms, their diversity and function is always dependent on host and the habitat. So these two H's, host and habitat, plays a crucial role in microbiome structure and development. So if we see the overall, estimate of microbial population, so currently it has been estimated that there are around 1 trillion species. But one of the most unfortunate thing is that 99.99% are literally unknown. And currently we can, if you go to NCBI and Gene Bank, you will find around over 1 million species that have been reported, and they have around 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 1 million or more. They have the sequence data available in the NCBI and Gene Bank. And if you talk about the culture bank of existing fungal or bacterial or archaeal resources, over 50,000 species have been cultured, and they have been identified and reported one way or the other from different environment and different host. Earth Microbiome Project has basically categorized around 10 million species. Um, However, they are not culturable, but their sequence data is available. Um, so, why microorganisms? Obviously, microorganisms are the most um, available and diverse and functional life form on Earth, and they were there uh, over almost 3 billion years ago. So if we see the overall, population size and their development and production, the different habitat have different ability and different composition of microorganisms to go through population development. So in case of root associated bacteria, it just take 1 day to have a population size that is required for symbiosis process. But and there are some other ecosystem, for example, in marine ecosystem above 200 meter, the population, the turnover time is around 16 days for microorganisms. However, interestingly, soil, which is one of the most dynamic um, um, habitat for microorganisms, it takes around 900 days, which is extremely higher amount of time. And that's why once the productivity and the diversity, once the diversity of the soil microorganism is lost, it is very difficult to uh, you know uh, replenish that particular diversity. And that's why soil is extremely important, and we have to always work on conserving our soil system, because it's one of the more important system from where the food begins, from where all the different activities start. So for example, a soil can farm, store, transform, recycle different nutrients that we basically require to survive, and not only for human but also for other living organism. So if the soil has higher microbiome activity, it is always regarded as a healthy soil. And if it is a healthy soil, it means it would also help the plants to grow more better conditions. So overall, the microbiome studies, whenever we perform, always ask three major questions. And if you want to do any kind of microbiome based studies, so your focus should be always on any of these three questions. And what are these questions? What is there? This is one of the basic question a microbiome research would always ask. That, for example, in what kind of microorganisms are associated with a host, or what kind of microorganisms are basically available in a particular habitat or environment. So you can talk about bacteria, fungi, archaeas, their diversities, and their distribution and abundance in a particular host or environmental system. The second question that usually a microbiome study always seek and ask is, what are they doing? For example, what is the function of these microorganisms that are associated with either a host or living in a particular environment? And the third question is always that, what can they do more, and what is their microbial potential, and how we can use these microorganisms in a specific environment or associated with a specific host. So if you divide a microbiome for plant, they are also known as phytomicrobiome, and they are divided into two major um, spheres, you can call it. So one is phyllosphere. So phyllosphere is mainly the above ground part of the plant, where the leaf, stem, flower, seeds, fruit, and you can name all these different organs of the plants. So, and each of the organ has its own set of microorganisms that plays a crucial role and important. Then comes the below ground sphere, and that is known as rhizosphere, and it has also its own um, uh, microbiome structure that is composed of fungi, bacteria, archaeas, protestes, viruses, microalgae. You can just name these different kind of microorganisms available and working in soil system. So basically from where these microorganisms are coming. So most of the plants root, they recruit microorganisms from bulk soil. And bulk soil provide a major reservoir of microbial DNA and microbial composition, where bulk soil is basically used as a resource to recruit microorganisms in the root. So some of the microorganisms might be a good colonizer of the plant, so they can colonize either inside the plant, or they can even go from one organ of the plant to another organ of the plant. So, for example, endophytic microorganisms are always inside the 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 plant root and plant shoot and different organs of the plants, and then they perform different functions. And these functions could also be relevant to stress adaptation. So now the problem with this is that I mentioned that there are four major factors including microorganisms. So if water pH and soil type changes, obviously the recruitment process of microorganisms also changes. And and not only that, If, for example, the root exudation pattern of the plant changes, it can also change the microbial community and microbial ability to colonize specific environment. And if the colonization pattern is changed, then it can obviously impact the nutrient mobilization from soil into root and root into different organ of the plant. So in conclusion, the plant microbiome is basically an open system that is characterized by oxygen, water, and pH ingredient. And obviously, as I mentioned, that plant inherit microbial members from soil, and bulk soil is a major contributor. So the conclusion is, if there is a healthy soil, it means a healthy plant and a healthy food, and that